The silver moon cast long shadows across the dusty streets of Old Tucson, Arizona Territory, as Naomi Mitchell clutched her shawl tightly around her shoulders, her trembling fingers brushing against the slight swell of her belly. 6 months along, and already the whispers followed her like vultures. Widow, destitute, desperate. She touched her long chestnut hair, the only beautiful thing she had left to sell. The year was 1878, and the Arizona Territory was unforgiving to a woman alone. Naomi's husband, Thomas, had been dead 3 months now, taken by a stray bullet during a bank robbery she hadn't even witnessed. All she had was the small room above the general store, paid through the month, and the knowledge that soon she would bring a child into this world with nothing to offer but her love. As dawn broke over the mountains, Naomi made her way to Prescott's general store. Mr. Prescott, a round-faced man with kind eyes, looked up as the bell above his door jingled. "Morning, Mrs. Mitchell. How are you feeling today?" His eyes darted briefly to her belly before meeting her gaze again. "I'm well, thank you." She forced a smile, her hand unconsciously moving to her stomach. "I was wondering if you'd heard of anyone looking for extra help. I can sew cook." "I wish I did, Mrs. Mitchell. Times are hard for everyone." He paused, seeming to consider something. "Though I did hear Mrs. Tompkins at the hotel might need someone to help with laundry." Naomi nodded gratefully. "Thank you, Mr. Prescott. I'll check with her." As she turned to leave, her gaze fell upon a beautiful wooden cradle in the corner of the store. It was simple but sturdy, with delicate carvings of desert flowers along its sides. Her heart ached at the sight. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Mr. Prescott said, following her gaze. "Just got it in yesterday. $8. $8 might as well have been 800. Naomi had less than $2 to her name. "Yes," she whispered. "It's lovely." With one last longing glance, she stepped back into the harsh morning sun after being turned away at the hotel. Mrs. Tompkins had already hired someone. Naomi wandered toward the edge of town, where a small sign reading "Simmons Barbershop" swung in the breeze. She had heard that sometimes women sold their hair for wigs back east. Her hand went to her thick brown locks, which fell almost to her waist. It was the only vanity she'd allowed herself after Thomas died. The thought of selling it made her stomach clench, but the memory of that cradle steeled her resolve. Her baby would need somewhere safe to sleep. With trembling fingers, she pushed open the door. Victor Evans hadn't planned on staying in Old Tucson for more than a night. He'd been drifting through the Arizona Territory for nearly 2 years now, taking odd jobs where he could find them. At 32, he was getting too old for the cowboy life, but he hadn't found a reason to settle down yet. That morning, he'd been helping the blacksmith repair a wagon wheel when he spotted her, a slender woman with rich brown hair, her condition visible even beneath her loose dress. There was something about her determined stride that caught his attention, the way she held her head high despite the obvious weight of her circumstances. He watched as she entered the barber shop and felt an inexplicable urge to follow. Instead, he hammered the metal harder, trying to focus on the task at hand. "Careful there," the blacksmith Morris chuckled. "You trying to reshape the whole wheel?" Victor grunted, wiping sweat from his brow. "Sorry, got distracted. By Mrs. Mitchell, I reckon." Morris nodded toward the barber shop. "Sad case, that one. Husband shot dead in a holdup over in Bisbee. She's been trying to make ends meet ever since." Victor's hand stilled. "She got any family?" "None that I know of. Been keeping to herself mostly. Proud woman, doesn't take to charity." Morris sighed. "Town's trying to help where we can, but times are hard for everyone." Inside the barber shop, Naomi faced Mr. Simmons, a thin man with a waxed mustache and kind eyes. "I've heard that sometimes. Women can sell their hair," she said softly, unable to meet his gaze. Mr. Simmons looked uncomfortable. "Yes, madam, that's true. There are buyers back east who pay for good hair. Yours is." He cleared his throat. "Exceptional quality." "How much?" Naomi's voice was barely audible. "For hair like yours, I could give you $6. $6. Not enough for the Cradle, but close. Perhaps Mr. Prescott would accept a partial payment and let her work off the rest. "I'll take it," she said firmly, sitting in the chair before she could change her mind. "Are you certain, Mrs. Mitchell?" Mr. Simmons hesitated, scissors in hand. "Once it's gone, I'm certain." She closed her eyes as the first snip echoed through the small shop. Victor finished his work with the blacksmith and collected his pay, $3 for half a day's work. Not bad. He was heading to the saloon for a meal when he saw her emerge from the barber shop, her once long hair now cropped short above her shoulders. Even from a distance, he could see she'd been crying. He watched as she walked with purpose toward the general store, her chin held high despite the tear tracks on her cheeks. Without thinking, he changed direction and followed her. Naomi laid the money on the counter in Prescott's store. $6, she said, her voice steady despite the rawness in her throat. "For the Cradle. I can work to pay the rest, Mrs. Mitchell." Mr. Prescott looked pained. "I'm sorry, but the Cradle's been sold. Just this morning after you left." Her carefully maintained composure cracked. "Sold," she whispered. But her hand went instinctively to her shortened hair. "I truly am sorry," Mr. Prescott said gently. "I had no idea you were planning to purchase it." Naomi nodded numbly, gathered her money, and turned to leave. As she pushed open the door, she collided with a broad chest. Strong hands steadied her, and she looked up into the most startling blue eyes she'd ever seen. "Excuse me," she murmured, trying to step around him. Victor Evans hadn't meant to eavesdrop, but the store was small, and her voice had carried. The desperation in it struck something deep inside him. "Mrs. Mitchell," he said, still holding her arms gently. She looked up, surprised. "Do I know you?" "No, madam, Victor Evans." He released her and tipped his hat. "I'm new in town. I couldn't help but overhear about the Cradle." Her chin lifted defensively. "It's nothing. Excuse me, please." "Wait," he said as she moved to pass him. "I'm a fair hand with woodworking. I could make you one." Naomi stopped, her expression a mixture of suspicion and hope. Why would you do that? It was a good question. Why would he? Victor had been drifting for years, avoiding entanglements, especially with women. Yet something about her vulnerability combined with her obvious strength drew him. "Let's just say I like to be useful," he offered with a slight smile. "And it seems to me you could use some help." "I can't pay you," she said bluntly. "Not what it would be worth. I'm not asking for payment, just maybe a meal when it's done." He hadn't planned to say that, but the words came naturally. Naomi studied him, taking in his worn but clean clothes, the calloused hands of a working man, the honest blue eyes. Her instincts told her he wasn't a threat, but she'd learned the hard way that people rarely offered something for nothing. "Why?" she asked again, more softly this time. Victor looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. "My sister," he said finally. "She was in a similar situation a few years back. Nobody helped her when they could have. I swore I wouldn't make the same mistake if I ever had the chance." There was truth in his eyes, though Naomi sensed he wasn't telling the whole story. Still, what choice did she have? Her baby would need a cradle. "A meal, then," she agreed. "When it's finished." "I'll need wood tools," he said, thinking aloud. "A place to work." "Mr. Jenkins at the livery stable might let you use his workshop," she suggested. "He's been kind to me since." She trailed off, her hand unconsciously moving to her belly. Victor nodded. "I'll speak to him. Do you have a preference for the wood?" The unexpected question brought a small smile to her face. "Something sturdy, but I like the carvings on the one in the store." desert flowers. I'll see what I can do, he promised. Where can I find you when it's ready? I have a room above the general store. Mr. Prescott will know where. She hesitated, then held out her hand. Thank you, Mr. Evans. His large hand engulfed her smaller one. Victor, please. Naomi, she offered in return, the first time she'd introduced herself without the Mrs. since Thomas died. It felt strange, but not entirely unwelcome. As Victor walked away, he wondered what he'd gotten himself into. He'd meant to stay in Old Tucson just long enough to earn money for the next stretch of road. Now, he'd committed to staying at least long enough to build a cradle for a pregnant widow. Morris the blacksmith was still working when Victor approached him later that afternoon. Need another job? Victor asked. Always, Morris chuckled. What are you thinking? Tools. For woodworking. I'm going to build a cradle. The words sounded strange to his own ears. Morris raised an eyebrow. For Mrs. Mitchell, I take it? News traveled fast in small towns. Victor nodded. Good man. Morris clapped him on the shoulder. Jenkins has most of what you'll need at the livery. He dabbles in carpentry himself. As for wood. He thought for a moment. There's a stand of pine about half a day's ride north. Good, strong wood. I can lend you a saw. Victor spent the next day gathering materials. Mr. Jenkins, a grizzled old man with a permanent squint, was surprisingly enthusiastic about the project. Been meaning to help that poor woman myself, he admitted, showing Victor his workshop behind the livery stable. But my hands ain't what they used to be for detailed work. You're welcome to use whatever you need here. By the end of the week, Victor had gathered enough wood, borrowed the necessary tools, and sketched out a design. He hadn't done serious woodworking in years, not since helping his father build furniture back home in Texas. But the skills came back to him gradually, his hands remembering what his mind had forgotten. Naomi, meanwhile, had secured a position helping Mrs. Foster, the minister's wife, with household chores 3 days a week. The pay was modest but steady, and Mrs. Foster didn't mind that Naomi brought her sewing with her to work on during quiet moments. She was returning from the Foster home one evening when she passed by the livery stable and heard the rhythmic sound of sawing. Curious, she peered through the open door of the workshop. Victor was bent over a workbench, his shirt sleeves rolled up to reveal muscular forearms as he carefully guided a saw through a piece of pine. Wood shavings covered the floor around his boots, and his brow was furrowed in concentration. Naomi must have made a sound because he suddenly looked up, surprise giving way to a smile when he saw her. Mrs. Mitchell, he said, setting down the saw and wiping his hands on his pants. I didn't hear you approach. I didn't mean to disturb you, she replied, stepping hesitantly into the workshop. I was just passing by and heard. Not disturbing at all. He gestured to the pieces of wood laid out before him. I've just started, as you can see. The sides and headboard are cut, but there's still a lot of work to do. Naomi moved closer, running her fingers lightly over the smooth pine. It's beautiful wood. It's good pine. Strong, should last for years. He watched her face as she examined the pieces, finding himself captivated by the subtle expressions that crossed her features. The short hair framed her face in a way that emphasized her delicate jawline and large, expressive eyes. I wanted to thank you again, she said softly. This is more than kind. Victor shrugged, uncomfortable with gratitude. It's nothing much, just something useful to do with my hands. She seemed to sense his discomfort and changed the subject. How long have you been in the Arizona territory? About 2 years now. Before that, I was in Texas, then New Mexico for a spell. He didn't elaborate on why he'd left each place. And before that, she asked, settling carefully on a wooden stool nearby. He hesitated. Born and raised in Virginia, Left after the war, understanding flickered in her eyes. The war between the states had ended 13 years ago, but its shadow still stretched long across the country. Which side? She asked quietly. Confederate, though not by choice. I was 16 when they conscripted me near the end. His jaw tightened. I didn't believe in the cause, but I didn't have much say in the matter. Naomi nodded, not pushing further. My husband Thomas was from Pennsylvania. He came west after the war, too. Looking for a fresh start, he said. Did he find it? Victor asked, genuinely interested. A sad smile touched her lips. For a while, we were happy here. He worked for the railroad and we were saving to buy land of our own someday. Her hand moved instinctively to her belly. We had plans. The simple statement held such profound loss that Victor felt his throat tighten. I'm sorry, he said inadequately. Thank you. She rose carefully. I should go, it's getting late and you have work to do. I'll walk you, he offered, already reaching for his coat. There's no need, it's getting dark, he insisted, and it's on my way to the boarding house. It wasn't, but Naomi didn't know that, and Victor wasn't about to let a pregnant woman walk alone at dusk, especially one who had already lost so much. They walked in comfortable silence, the first stars appearing overhead. How long will you stay in Old Tucson? She asked as they approached the general store. Long enough to finish the Cradle, he replied truthfully. After that, I haven't decided. Naomi nodded, unsurprised. Drifters rarely stayed in one place long. Well, thank you for the escort, Mr. Evans. Victor, she corrected herself. Good night, Naomi, he said softly, waiting until she was safely inside before turning back toward the livery stable. He had more work to do before he could sleep. Over the next 2 weeks, Victor fell into a routine. He took odd jobs around town during the mornings, earning enough to pay for his room and meals, then spent his afternoons and evenings working on the Cradle. The basic structure came together quickly, but the detailed work, the carvings Naomi had admired on the store's Cradle, required more time and patience. He found himself enjoying the precision it demanded, the way it required his complete focus. It had been years since he'd done work that felt truly meaningful. Naomi stopped by occasionally to see his progress, never staying long but always expressing her appreciation. Victor found himself looking forward to these brief visits, the way her eyes lit up when she saw the Cradle taking shape. One evening, as he was carefully carving a saguaro blossom into the headboard, she arrived with a small basket covered with a cloth. I thought you might be hungry, she explained, setting the basket on a corner of the workbench. It's nothing fancy, just some bread and stew. Victor set down his tools and wiped his hands. That's mighty kind of you. I lost track of time and missed supper at the boarding house. Consider it a down payment on that meal I owe you, she said with a smile, uncovering the basket to reveal a small pot still steaming with fragrant stew and several thick slices of bread. As Victor ate, Naomi examined the carvings he'd completed. These are beautiful, she said, tracing a finger over a delicate ocotillo flower. Where did you learn to do this? My father was a cabinet maker before the war, he explained between mouthfuls. I worked with him from the time I was old enough to hold a saw. He was a master at this sort of detail work. I'm just a pale imitation. I wouldn't say that, she disagreed, studying the intricate designs. These are wonderful. Your father would be proud. Victor fell silent, focusing on his food. After a moment, Naomi sensed she'd touched a sensitive subject and changed direction. The baby moved today, she said softly, her hand resting on her growing belly. Really moved, not just the flutters I've been feeling, like he was doing somersaults in there. He? Victor asked, setting aside the empty bowl. Naomi smiled. Or she? Thomas was convinced it would be a boy. He had a name all picked out, William, after his father. Her smile faltered slightly. "I've been thinking if it's a girl, I might name her Rose after my mother." "Both good, strong names," Victor approved. He hesitated, then asked, "Do you have family that will help you?" "After the baby comes," she shook her head. "My parents died years ago. I have an aunt in San Francisco, but we haven't spoken in years. Thomas had a brother somewhere in Colorado, but I wouldn't know how to find him." The weight of her solitude hung heavy between them. Victor wanted to offer more help, but didn't know how without overstepping. "The cradle should be finished within the week," he said finally, returning to safer ground. "The carvings take time, but the structure is solid." "I have no doubt," Naomi replied, gathering her basket. "Thank you again, Victor, for everything." After she left, Victor worked late into the night, his hands moving with newfound purpose across the wood. The next morning, a commotion in the street drew him from the boarding house before he'd finished his coffee. A crowd had gathered outside the general store, and Victor felt a surge of alarm when he realized it centered around Naomi's lodgings. Pushing his way through, he found Mr. Prescott directing several men who were carrying Naomi's few belongings out of the building. "What's happening here?" Victor demanded, spotting Naomi standing to one side, her face pale. Mr. Prescott looked uncomfortable. "Building's been sold," he explained. "New owner wants to expand the store into the upper level. Mrs. Mitchell needs to vacate by noon." "Today?" Victor turned to Naomi. "Where will you go?" She shook her head slightly, and Victor could see she was fighting tears. "Mrs. Foster mentioned a room at the church, but it's not ready yet. They need at least a week to prepare it." "A week," Victor repeated flatly. "And where are you supposed to stay until then?" "I'll figure something out," she said with forced calm, though her hands trembled as she clutched a small bundle of clothing. Victor made a decision then that surprised even himself. "You'll stay at my room at the boarding house. I'll take a room at the saloon until the church space is ready." Naomi's eyes widened. "I couldn't possibly. You can and you will," he said firmly. "It's paid through the end of the month anyway. Would be a shame to waste it." Mr. Prescott looked relieved. "That's generous of you, Evans. I told Mrs. Mitchell I'd help, but my sister's visiting and we don't have the space." Victor barely heard him, focused on Naomi's face. "It's settled then," he said, gentling his tone. "Let me help you move your things." Later, after he'd installed Naomi in his small but clean room at Mrs. Holbrook's boarding house, Victor returned to the livery stable. His hands moved with renewed urgency over the cradle. The temporary solution he'd offered wouldn't last long, and Naomi would need somewhere permanent to stay, especially with a baby coming. The church room was a stopgap at best. He worked through the night, his mind turning over possibilities. By morning, the cradle was nearly complete, needing only a final sanding and a coat of protective oil. But Victor had made another decision as well. He found Naomi at the boarding house, where Mrs. Holbrook had insisted she join the other boarders for breakfast despite her protests that she wasn't paying for meals. "Victor," she greeted him with surprise. "I didn't expect to see you this morning. Have you slept at all?" "Not much," he admitted, taking the seat across from her. The other boarders were giving them curious glances, but he ignored them. "I need to talk to you about something important." Her expression grew cautious. "Is everything all right? The cradle's almost finished," he began, then hesitated. What he was about to propose was madness. They barely knew each other. "But that's not what I want to discuss." Naomi waited, her hands curled protectively around her teacup. "I'm buying land," Victor said abruptly. 10 acres just outside of town. There's a small cabin on it, needs some work, but it's solid. Good well water. Room for a garden, maybe some livestock eventually." Naomi looked confused. "That's wonderful, but I want you to come with me," he continued before he lost his nerve. "Not as. I mean, I'm not proposing marriage, not yet, that would be too sudden, but as a friend, a partner maybe in time. You need a home for your baby and I. He took a deep breath. I'm tired of drifting. Shock rendered her speechless. Around them, the other boarders had gone quiet, straining to hear. You don't have to answer right now, Victor said, suddenly self-conscious. It's a lot to consider. I know we hardly know each other, but I respect you, Naomi, and I think we could help each other. Victor, she finally managed, her voice barely above a whisper, this is unexpected, I know. He met her gaze steadily, but sometimes unexpected things turn out to be exactly what we need. May I see this land? She asked after a long moment. Hope flared in his chest. Of course, as soon as you're ready. That afternoon, Victor borrowed a wagon from Mr. Jenkins and drove Naomi out to the property. It was modest 10 acres of mostly flat land with scattered mesquite trees and cacti. The cabin was small, just 2 rooms with a stone chimney, but the roof was sound, and the well water clear and sweet. It needs work, Victor acknowledged as he helped her down from the wagon. But the bones are good. I can add on as needed, maybe a porch to start. Naomi walked slowly around the property, her expression thoughtful. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the land, and a gentle breeze stirred her short hair. Why me? She asked finally, turning to face him. Why are you doing all this for someone you barely know? Victor had been asking himself the same question. I told you about my sister, he said after a moment. What I didn't tell you is that she died, her and her baby both, alone in a cabin not unlike this one. Her husband had abandoned her, and she had nowhere to turn. By the time I found out and went looking for her, it was too late. Pain etched lines around his eyes as he continued. I've been running from that failure ever since, taking odd jobs, never staying anywhere long enough to form attachments. But when I saw you that day with your head held high despite everything, something changed. I can't explain it better than that. Naomi's eyes had filled with tears. I'm so sorry about your sister, she said softly. Me too. Victor looked away, across the land that could be a new beginning for both of them. I'm not asking for anything from you except a chance to prove that not all men leave when things get difficult, a chance to build something worthwhile for both of us. Naomi was quiet for so long that Victor began to fear he'd overstepped, ruined whatever fragile connection had been growing between them. But then she spoke, her voice steady despite the tears on her cheeks. My husband Thomas was a good man, she said. He would have been a wonderful father. When he died, I thought my heart died with him. She pressed a hand to her chest. But this baby has kept me going, made me realize I still have so much love to give. She took a step closer to Victor. I don't know if I'm ready to open my heart again. But I do know that I want my child to have a home, a safe place to grow, if you're offering that, if you're willing to be patient with me. Hope bloomed in Victor's chest. As patient as you need, he promised. Then yes, she said simply. Let's try. The next week passed in a whirlwind of activity. Victor finished the cradle, a beautiful piece with intricately carved desert flowers and cacti adorning the headboard and sides. When he presented it to Naomi, she ran her fingers over the smooth wood with tears in her eyes. It's more beautiful than I could have imagined, she whispered. Thank you. Meanwhile, they began making preparations for the move to the cabin. Victor worked on repairs, patching the roof and floor where needed, while Naomi gathered the few supplies they would need to start their new life. The townspeople, once they understood the arrangement, were surprisingly supportive. About time you settled down, Evans, Morris the blacksmith said, helping load a stove onto the wagon. And Mrs. Mitchell needs someone looking after her and that baby. Mrs. Foster from the church brought quilts and linens. "The Lord works in mysterious ways," she said with a knowing smile. "Sometimes he brings people together in the most unexpected circumstances." Mr. Prescott, perhaps feeling guilty about the sudden eviction, contributed a month's worth of Staples flour, sugar, coffee, and beans. "Consider it a housewarming gift," he insisted when Naomi tried to pay. By the end of the week, they were ready to move. The morning of their departure, Reverend Foster approached them as they were loading the last of their belongings. "I understand you two aren't married," he said without preamble, "but are planning to live together on that property." Victor tensed, preparing for a lecture. "That's right," he said cautiously. "For now, we're just friends helping each other." The Reverend nodded thoughtfully. "I see. Well, friends or not, there will be talk, and while I'm not one to pay much mind to gossip, I do care about the well-being of my flock." He cleared his throat. "Which is why I'm offering to perform a ceremony should you decide you want one. No pressure, of course, just an offer." Naomi and Victor exchanged surprised glances. "Thank you, Reverend," Naomi said carefully. "We'll keep that in mind." After the Reverend left, they finished loading in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. Finally, as Victor helped Naomi onto the wagon seat, she spoke. "He's right, you know, there will be talk." Victor settled beside her and took up the reins. "Let them talk," he said simply. "We know the truth of our arrangement." The truth was more complicated than either of them was ready to admit. In the short time they'd known each other, something had grown between them, a tentative bond based on mutual respect and shared purpose. Whether it would blossom into something more remained to be seen. As they drove toward their new home, the cradle secured carefully in the back of the wagon, Naomi felt a flutter of hope for the first time since Thomas died. It wasn't the life she had planned, but perhaps it could be a good life nonetheless. The cabin welcomed them with the quiet solidity of a place that had weathered many seasons. Victor had worked hard to make it habitable, sweeping out dust and debris, patching holes, and even fashioning rough curtains for the small windows from material Naomi had provided. "It's not much," he said as he helped her down from the wagon, "but it's a start." "It's perfect," Naomi replied, and meant it. After the uncertainty of the past months, the simple stability of four walls and a roof felt like luxury. They settled into a routine over the next few weeks. Victor continued to take jobs in town, riding out each morning and returning by sundown. Naomi tended to the cabin, planting a small garden with seeds Mrs. Foster had given her, and sewing baby clothes from fabric scraps. In the evenings, they would sit on the newly built porch, watching the sunset paint the desert in shades of gold and crimson. Sometimes they talked, Victor slowly revealing more about his past, his childhood in Virginia, his brief and traumatic experience in the war, his years of drifting afterward. Naomi shared stories of her parents, her journey west as a young woman, her meeting and falling in love with Thomas. Other times they sat in comfortable silence, content in each other's company. The cradle sat in the corner of the cabin's main room, a constant reminder of how their unusual partnership had begun. As Naomi's time grew nearer, Victor added a second room to the cabin, working evenings and Sundays to complete it before the baby arrived. "You need your privacy," he insisted when Naomi protested the extra work. "And where will you sleep?" she asked. "I'll make do in the main room for now," he replied. "Later, when I've saved more, I'll add another room for myself." His thoughtfulness touched her deeply. Thomas had been kind, but he'd never shown the same attention to her needs and comfort that Victor did. One evening in early October, as the first hint of autumn coolness touched the desert air, Naomi sat on the porch shelling peas while Victor repaired a leather bridle. A companionable silence stretched between them, broken only by the soft sounds of their work and the distant call of a coyote. "Victor," Naomi said suddenly, setting aside her bowl of peas. "There's something I've been meaning to ask you." He looked up, his hand stilling. "What's that? Why haven't you?" "That is." She took a deep breath. "The Reverend's offer about the ceremony, you've never mentioned it." Victor set the bridle aside carefully. "I didn't want to pressure you," he said simply. "This arrangement was meant to give you freedom, not to trap you in another commitment before you're ready." "And if I were ready?" she asked softly. His eyes, so startlingly blue against his tanned face, widened slightly. "Are you saying—" "I'm saying that I care for you," Naomi said, the words coming easier than she'd expected. "These past weeks, watching you work so hard for us, for this home, I've come to admire you greatly. And yes, to have feelings for you." Victor moved to sit beside her on the porch step, close but not touching. "I care for you too, Naomi, more than I thought possible after such a short time, but your heart still belongs to Thomas in many ways, and that's as it should be. He was your husband, the father of your child." "Yes," she acknowledged. "I will always love Thomas, but I'm beginning to think the heart has room for more than one love in a lifetime." She reached out tentatively, placing her hand over his. "And I think I could love you, Victor Evans. If you'll give me time." His fingers curled around hers. "All the time you need," he promised. Then, with a smile that transformed his usually serious face, "though preferably before that baby decides to arrive." Naomi laughed, the sound clear and bright in the evening air. "I think that can be arranged." They were married 3 days later in a simple ceremony at the church in Old Tucson. Mrs. Foster had insisted on making Naomi a new dress, loose enough to accommodate her advanced pregnancy, but made of fine blue calico that brought out the warmth in her brown eyes. Victor wore the only good shirt he owned, freshly washed and pressed for the occasion, and a borrowed tie that made him tug uncomfortably at his collar throughout the ceremony. The townspeople turned out in surprising numbers, filling the small church to capacity. Even Mr. Simmons, the barber, attended, presenting Naomi with a pretty comb for her now shoulder-length hair. "I feel like we've known each other forever, not just months," Victor said softly as they exchanged simple gold bands purchased with his savings. "Some souls recognize each other," Reverend Foster commented with a smile. "Now, by the power vested in me, I pronounce you husband and wife." Their first kiss as a married couple was gentle, tentative, but filled with promise. As they turned to face their friends and neighbors, Naomi felt the baby kick vigorously, as if offering its own approval of the union. The ride back to their cabin that evening was quiet, both of them absorbed in the magnitude of the step they had taken. Victor helped Naomi down from the wagon with the same care he always showed, but there was a new awareness between them now, an acknowledgement of the changed nature of their relationship. Inside, the cabin glowed with welcoming lamplight. Victor had prepared it before they left for town, laying a fire ready to light and placing wildflowers in a jar on the table. It was a small gesture, but it brought tears to Naomi's eyes. "Welcome home, Mrs. Evans," he said softly, leading her inside. 2 weeks later, in the early hours of a clear autumn morning, Naomi went into labor. Victor, who had been sleeping on a pallet in the main room as promised, woke to the sound of her quiet gasp. "Is it time?" he asked, immediately alert. Naomi nodded, her face tense with discomfort. "I think so." "I'll fetch Mrs. Granger," he said, reaching for his boots. The widow Granger, who lived a mile down the road, had served as midwife to half the county over the years. "Hurry," Naomi whispered, one hand pressed to her lower back. Victor rode faster than he ever had, returning with Mrs. Granger just as dawn was breaking. The older woman took charge with brisk efficiency, sending Victor to heat water and then banishing him to the porch. "But she's my wife," he protested. "I should be with her." "You'll only get in the way," Mrs. Granger said firmly. "First babies take time. Go tend to your chores. I'll call you when there's news." Reluctantly, Victor did as he was told, though he couldn't focus on anything for more than a few minutes at a time. Every cry from inside the cabin sent him rushing to the door, only to be waved away by Mrs. Granger. The hours stretched endlessly. Victor paced, prayed, and cursed his own helplessness in turn. By mid-afternoon, the sun high and hot overhead, he was nearly frantic with worry. "It's taking too long," he muttered to himself. "Something must be wrong." Just as he was about to insist on entering regardless of Mrs. Granger's orders, the cabin door opened. The midwife stood there, wiping her hands on her apron, her face creased with fatigue but smiling. "You can come in now, Mr. Evans," she said. "There's someone who wants to meet you." Heart pounding, Victor stepped into the cabin. Naomi lay in the bed he had built for her, pale and exhausted but radiant, a small bundle cradled in her arms. "Victor," she whispered as he approached. "Meet your son, son." The word echoed in his head as he gazed down at the tiny red face peering out from the blanket. The baby had a shock of dark hair and his mother's determined chin. "He's perfect," Victor breathed, carefully sitting on the edge of the bed. "How are you?" "Tired," Naomi admitted, "but happy." She shifted slightly. "Would you like to hold him?" Victor hesitated. "I've never held a baby before. What if I do it wrong?" "You won't," she assured him, gently transferring the infant to his arms. The weight of the baby, his son, though not by blood, settled against his chest, and Victor felt something break open inside him. A fierce, protective love unlike anything he had ever known flooded through him. "Hello, little one," he whispered, one finger gently tracing the baby's cheek. "Welcome to the world. I thought we might name him William after Thomas's father," Naomi said softly, "but with Evans as his last name, if that's all right with you." Victor looked up, his vision blurring with unexpected tears. "You want him to have my name?" "Of course," she said simply. "You're his father now in all the ways that truly matter." Overcome, Victor could only nod. He looked back down at William, who had wrapped a tiny hand around his finger with surprising strength. "William Evans," he said, testing the name. "It suits him." That night after Mrs. Granger had gone home with promises to return the next day, Victor moved the cradle he had built next to their bed. William slept peacefully within it, his small chest rising and falling in the rhythm of new life. As moonlight filtered through the curtained window, Victor sat beside Naomi, who was finally resting after her long ordeal. "Thank you," he said softly, taking her hand. She smiled tiredly. "For what?" "For trusting me. For giving me a family." He brought her hand to his lips. "I never thought I'd have this." "Nor I after Thomas died," she admitted. "But life has a way of surprising us." As if on cue, William made a small sound in his sleep, and they both turned to look at him, their faces soft with wonder. "I love you," Victor said suddenly, the words rising unbidden but utterly true. "I know it's soon, and I don't expect you to say it back yet, but I need you to know." Naomi's eyes filled with tears. "I think I've been falling in love with you since you offered to build that cradle," she whispered. "I just wasn't ready to admit it to myself." Victor leaned forward to kiss her gently, mindful of her exhaustion. As he drew back, William began to fuss in earnest, his tiny face scrunching up as he prepared to wail. "Duty calls," Naomi said with a tired laugh, reaching for the baby. Victor watched as she settled William at her breast, his heart so full it felt like it might burst. This small cabin, this woman, this child, they were his home now, his anchor after years of drifting. Outside, the desert night was alive with sounds: the distant howl of coyotes, the rustle of wind through mesquite, the occasional hoot of an owl. Inside, The soft murmur of Naomi's voice as she crooned to William created a different kind of music, one that spoke of safety and belonging. 5 years later, the small cabin had grown into a proper house, with 3 bedrooms, a large kitchen, and a wide porch that wrapped around 2 sides. The original 10 acres had expanded to 30, with a small herd of cattle, several horses, and a thriving garden that produced more vegetables than they could eat. William, now a sturdy 5-year-old with his mother's brown eyes and his adoptive father's serious demeanor, had been joined by 2 siblings. 3-year-old Rose, named for Naomi's mother, and 6-month-old James, who had his father's startling blue eyes. On a warm spring evening, as the family sat on the porch after supper, William looked up from the small wooden horse Victor had carved for him. "Pa," he said thoughtfully, "Mr. Jenkins told me today that you built my cradle before I was born." Victor exchanged a glance with Naomi, who was nursing baby James while Rose played with her doll nearby. "That's right," he confirmed. "I did build your cradle. But Mrs. Tompkins at the hotel said you weren't my real pa then," William continued, his young brow furrowed in confusion. "She said my real pa died before I was born." Naomi tensed, but Victor remained calm. They had always planned to tell William the truth when he was old enough to understand. "Come here, son," Victor said, patting the space beside him on the porch step. William came obediently, settling against Victor's side. "Your mother was married before she married me," Victor explained, his arm around the boy's shoulders. "His name was Thomas Mitchell, and he was a good man. He died before you were born, so he never got to meet you. But he was very excited about becoming your father." "Then who are you?" William asked, looking up with innocent directness. Victor smiled. "I'm the man who loves your mother and loves you, who has been blessed to be your father in every way that matters since the day you were born." William considered this solemnly. "So I have 2 paths?" "Yes," Naomi said gently, reaching out to stroke her son's hair. "You have Thomas, who gave you life, and Victor, who has raised you and loved you every day since." "And built my cradle," William added, seeming satisfied with this explanation. "And built your cradle," Victor agreed, ruffling the boy's hair. "Now, how about you help me feed the horses before bedtime?" William ran ahead eagerly while Victor hung back for a moment with Naomi and the younger children. "That went well," he said, dropping a kiss on James's downy head, then on Naomi's lips. "He's lucky to have you," Naomi said softly. "We all are." As the setting sun painted the desert in gold and the first stars appeared overhead, Victor Evans looked at his family, at the life he had built from an act of kindness, and a wooden cradle, and knew he had found something infinitely precious. Not just a home or a family, but a love that had grown from the most unexpected of beginnings into something strong and enduring, like the desert flowers that bloomed briefly but brilliantly after rain. That night, after the children were asleep, Victor and Naomi stood together on the porch, his arm around her waist as they gazed out at the land they had transformed together. "You ever think about that day?" Naomi asked. "When you first saw me coming out of the barber shop?" "Often," Victor admitted. "I remember thinking how brave you were, holding your head up despite everything." "I was terrified," she confessed. "I had no idea what the future held, but then you offered to build that cradle and suddenly there was hope again." Victor turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "That cradle was the best thing I ever made," he said seriously. "Not because of the craftsmanship, but because it led me to you, to this life we've built together." "From such small beginnings," Naomi murmured, leaning into his embrace. "The most important things often start small," Victor replied, thinking of their children sleeping peacefully inside, of the love that had grown between them day by day, of the home they had created from nothing but hope and hard work. As they stood together under the vast canopy of stars, the cradle that had started their journey together sat in the corner of Rose's room, now holding her favorite doll. Eventually, it would be passed down to James's children, and then to their children's children, carrying with it the story of a pregnant widow, a drifting cowboy, and the love that had given them both a second chance at happiness.